My name is Morag Robertson. I'm the chair of the St Ives Community Land Trust, and this is the second in a series of films about the history of the site of our first housing project, the Old Vicarage Flats, Street and Pole, St Ives. In the first film, Janet Axten from St Ives Archive talked about some of the documents they've uncovered, and recently I met her in the former vicarage garden at the rear of our building.
I'm thrilled to be actually standing here in this beautiful garden, which I haven't stood in for many years. We suddenly realised is the centre of the town. In the 19th century, this was probably one of the most important pieces of land, and yet nobody realises. And if the Community Land Trust hadn't taken over the building recently, I don't think that we would have ever looked at what's around here and to see the significance of these few buildings and the history of them.
Since we last spoke, Janet says people have been sending in their memories, stories and photographs.
We have received information from the children one of the vicars who actually lived in the new vicarage in front of me, and they used to play a lot in the garden and they enjoyed that, and we have got a photograph of them. The other major person was somebody who lived in the flats, but only for 2 years, and she told me a lot about it and how much she enjoyed living here, but that it was incredibly cold because the huge windows let in all sorts of drafts, and the building is old. But she said how lovely it was. She enjoyed being in the centre of town. But what was more valuable was the fact that she talked about the garden. And although the garden now is such a mess and it's very difficult to tell exactly how it used to be, she spent a lot of time there, as did apparently her predecessor. And in the garden was a fish pond, amazingly, and also a greenhouse. And it was full of beautiful plants. I asked her about the concrete wall, which I find not very nice at all, and she realised that when I sent her photographs of it, that it was absolutely covered in plants and flowers, and so she never saw the wall. And she said it was beautiful when the roses came out. We're under the shadow almost of the parish church, and this land was an open space. So this became the land between the church and the parsonage. And if you look on the old maps, there's a big path going through the middle. Now, the graveyard around the parish church was full. So this became the burial ground. For nearly 30 years, until they built the big cemetery at Barnoon, this was the graveyard. I think one of the fascinating buildings, of course, is the building on my right, which is now Redfern Court. But it was the National School. You have to remember that before the board schools were started in the late 1870s, all children didn't go to school. So in 1840 they had this building built, and we found all the original legal documents about it. And it was built for the education of the working people, and it wasn't just children, it was also adults. So this was incredibly important, but interestingly we're finding details of people who taught there and people who went there, and that's going to be very rewarding, because the school was still there in 1900 because they needed to build an extension, and that's when they built the parish rooms. So the school became really quite large, and if you go into the parish rooms, you've got 2 levels, and so you could have 2 classes. And when the archive, St Ives Archive, moved in about 2003 or 4, I can't remember the exact date, one of the women at our opening had actually been to the school, which is very exciting. Later on, the school closed and it was turned into very nice flats. And the fence that you see here is quite recent, and in fact the garden went straight through over into the flats. It was all one big piece of land. The parish rooms remained under the ownership of the parochial church council. We had the upstairs, and downstairs they used to have events and lunches and things for the parish. Before we were there used to be yoga classes and evening classes and things, so it was very much part of the community. And sadly, the Parochial Church Council in about 2015 decided they wanted to sell it. We had to leave fairly rapidly, but sadly nothing's happened to it and it's just gradually crumbling. But it's a very important building in here, and it has an amazing history. Before the parsonage was built, there was a most beautiful, beautiful building here called the Retreat. We can't tell exactly when it was built. We're still struggling away to find it. We don't even have proper photographs of it. It was owned for many years by Mr. James Lanham, who had Lanham's in the High Street. And the garden must have been fantastic. It joined onto this garden and went right across to the back of the buildings in the High Street. But Mr. Lanham died, and the council desperately wanted more offices, and they also wanted a public hall for dances and things. And so they had an opportunity to knock it down, much to a lot of people's upset. There were people in the town who wanted it to be a museum or an art gallery or something for the people. But no, the war was coming, it was knocked down, and up went the Guildhall. There is another building which was in front of the parsonage, and is even older than the parsonage. It probably goes back to 1902, which was a square building, and it was used by the council for a number of years. It was the office of Mr. Tresidder. Now, Mr. Tresidder was the important solicitor in the town. He signed all the legal documents. He was there. Council offices, when they needed to expand, went in there. And it wasn't a very beautiful building, but it was in very good condition. It was here during the war, and evacuees used to live here, used to stay here. And then when, obviously, once they built the Guildhall, the councillors and the offices could move in there, so the building was rented out. And in 1960, the council decided to knock it down, and everyone was horrified. But of course, what they wanted was a car park. And despite the house being very appropriate for living in and providing accommodation in the centre of town, the council won, and that's why we have a car park now. So this whole area shows how the town developed, how it was governed, and the church's involvement with it. And that's what's so interesting, and I think we need to do everything we can to mark all of that and to record it, and so that it's not forgotten.